My parents sued to evict me so my sister could own her first home. In court, my 7-year-old asked the judge, "Can I show you something Grandma doesn't know?" She pressed play and everything changed. The moment my daughter tugged on my blazer in a courtroom, I stopped breathing, not because I was afraid, because I had been a licensed architect for 14 years, because I had rebuilt that house with my own hands, filed every permit, pulled every wire, and spent the better part of 18 months constructing something from rubble that could keep my child safe, because I had prepared for every scenario, the texts, the receipts, the photographs, the binder so thick it landed on the clerk's desk like a dropped dictionary. I had prepared for everything, except Nora. She was 7 years old. She was wearing her navy school blazer because I'd told her court was a formal place, and she'd taken that seriously in the way that 7-year-olds take things seriously. Completely. Literally. With a gravity that makes adults look half-assembled. She had her pink backpack on her shoulders. Her hair was in 2 braids that I had done myself at 6:45 that morning while she ate cereal and asked me whether judges were allowed to have pets. She tugged my blazer. She looked up at the bench, and she asked, in the smallest voice in that cold fluorescent room, whether she could show the judge something her mommy didn't even know about. The room went so quiet I could hear the ventilation system. I looked down at my daughter. She looked back at me with those enormous, specific eyes. The eyes of a child who knows she's holding something important and is very sure she's doing the right thing with it. I had built her a home. She was about to save it. My name is Clara Osi Mensah. I'm 39. I have a degree in architecture from the University of Illinois and a commercial license I've held for 14 years, through 2 recessions, 1 bad marriage, and a child born 11 weeks early who spent the first 6 weeks of her life in a NICU isolette while I sat next to her and memorized the sound of her breathing as if it were something I could protect by knowing it well enough. Nora is 7 now. She has my nose and her father's impossible eyelashes, and a respiratory system that required, for the first 5 years of her life, quarterly monitoring by a pediatric pulmonologist named Dr. Rashida Okonkwo at Northwestern Medicine. Premature birth, underdeveloped lung tissue, environmental triggers. The technical language for it is manageable with appropriate conditions. The non-technical language is, she cannot live in a place with mold, with poor ventilation, with any of the invisible architectural failures that old buildings develop when they've been neglected for decades. This matters. Please remember this. 2.5 years ago, Nora had a respiratory episode that put her in the pediatric ward for 6 days. She was 5. She shared a room with a 10-year-old and a mobile that played a song I will never fully unhear, and she looked very small in that hospital bed. And when Dr. Okonkwo pulled me into the hallway and explained that our apartment's air quality was a contributing factor, old building, basement unit, poor filtration, I made a decision in the way you make decisions when your child is in a hospital bed and you finally understand that the word unacceptable has a bottom. I called my parents. My father, Robert Mensah, is 66. He is a retired civil engineer with the particular stubborn reasonableness of a man who built things for 40 years and believes that all problems have a structural solution if you approach them correctly. He owns, among other assets, a property in Evanston that includes a main house and a carriage house at the back, a former coach house built in 1908 that had been used for storage since approximately 1987 and had not been meaningfully maintained since approximately 1972. He offered it to us. I want to be precise about this because it matters deeply to everything that followed. He did not offer to fix it. He offered it, the structure, such as it was. 2 rooms of crumbling plaster, a roof that let light through in 3 places, electrical wiring that a licensed inspector would have red tagged without hesitation, and a floor that had partially rotted through in the northeast corner. He called it a good bones situation. I called it a 14-month construction project and began pulling permits the following week. I should tell you about Ava, because you need to understand her before the courtroom makes full sense. My younger sister is 32. She is lovely in the way of someone who has always been the lovely one. Effortless about it, slightly surprised when the world doesn't arrange itself around the fact. She has a master's in art history that she completed 5 years ago and has deployed approximately never, a series of positions at galleries and nonprofits that each lasted about 18 months before something better materialized, and a gift for walking into rooms and becoming the center of them that I have spent my entire life watching with a mixture of genuine admiration and exhaustion. She is not stupid. I want to be clear about that too. The version of this story that makes her a cartoon villain is easier, but it's not the whole picture. She is a person who has spent her entire life being accommodated, who has therefore developed a genuine, non-ironic belief that accommodation is simply the natural order of things. She doesn't think she's taking, she thinks she's receiving. There is a difference, and it makes her more dangerous than someone who knows they're taking, because you can't negotiate with someone who doesn't recognize the transaction. She came to Sunday dinner in April, about 8 months after I'd moved in and completed the bulk of the renovation. I had installed a reclaimed oak floor. I had restored the original brick fireplace over 4 days with mortar and a small chisel, and language I tried not to use in front of Nora. I had put in casement windows that maximized the afternoon light. The carriage house ran east-west, and if you positioned them correctly, you got something genuinely beautiful in the late afternoon, golden and warm and clean. Ava stood at the window during dinner and looked at the carriage house across the garden. "It has such incredible natural light," she said, in the tone of someone who has already made a decision. "It's exactly like a starter home." "For who?" I asked. "For me, obviously." My mother rearranged her asparagus. My father took a very slow sip of wine. Neither of them looked at me. The folder arrived 3 days later. I want to tell you exactly how the folder landed. My mother called it a coffee. She has a gift for nomenclature. She can name a thing something so completely neutral that you bring your normal self to it and only realize what it actually is when you're already sitting down and there's nowhere to go. We met at a cafe on Dempster. She was already there when I arrived. Navy blazer, reading glasses on, a flat white in front of her. She looked like someone's competent mother, which she was, technically. She slid the manila folder across the table with a manicured smile. Your father and I feel it's time to make things official with the property. Inside, a 90-day notice to vacate, to preserve the family legacy. I read it out loud because I needed to hear what it sounded like. Ava needs a first home, my mother said. Her voice was warm. That was the worst part. The warmth. She's 32, Clara. She needs to get established. You're so capable. You'll land on your feet anywhere. You always do. I thought about that word, capable. How it works as a compliment to disguise a cruelty. How you use it on the person you're less worried about because they've given you less reason to worry, and how somewhere in the translation it becomes the justification for why they get less. I looked at the notice. My throat had sealed itself shut. I paid the property taxes for 18 months, I said carefully. We've always been grateful for that. My mother picked up her flat white. It really helped. I thanked her for the coffee. I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table, the one I had sanded and refinished myself from an estate sale piece that had cost $40 in 4 hours, and I let myself feel what I was feeling for exactly 11 minutes. Anger, mostly. The specific, clarifying kind that comes when something you trusted reveals itself completely. Then I opened my laptop and started building a binder. I am an architect. The foundational skill of architecture is not drawing, it's documentation. It's the ability to generate a paper record of every decision, every material, every phase of construction that can be read by someone who wasn't there and understood completely. A permit application is a narrative. A site log is a narrative. An invoice is a narrative. I had, entirely by professional instinct, been narrating this project for 14 months. Every receipt. Lumber from a yard in Skokie, $4,300. Copper wiring, $1,870. Spray foam insulation rated for the respiratory sensitivities Dr. Okonkwo had specified in writing, $890. The egress windows, which I had installed specifically to bring the structure up to current fire code, $2,200 for 2. The electrical subpanel I had routed to replace the 1960s fuse box, which had been a genuine fire risk, $1,600 for materials, another $800 in permitted labor. Total investment in materials alone, $14,200, not counting my own labor, which at my hourly consulting rate would have added another $30,000 to the number. I printed every bank transfer. I printed every text from my mother. There were 11. Thanks for covering the property taxes, Clara. So glad you're getting the roof sorted. Your father says the electrical work looks impressive. 11 texts, each one a small, inadvertent acknowledgement that I had been doing this, that it had cost me money, that they had benefited. I printed them all and put them in chronological order. I printed the building permits, each one bearing my license number, each one signed by the relevant city inspector, each one a legal document establishing that the work had been done, that it had been done correctly, and that it had been done by me. I printed the high-resolution photographs I had taken at every phase, before, during, after. The rotted floor being pulled up, the subpanel being installed, the new roof going on, the egress windows being framed, Nora, in her small winter coat, standing in the finished living room the day we moved in. I hole-punched everything. I snapped it into a binder. The binder was 3.5 inches thick. When I dropped it on the kitchen table, it made a sound like a verdict. I called an attorney. Her name was Priya Anand. She had been practicing real estate and property litigation for 16 years, first at a firm and then at her own boutique practice, Anand Property Law, on Main Street in Evanston. She had the particular efficiency of someone who has heard every version of a family property dispute and has stopped being surprised by any of them. She read the 90-day notice. She reviewed the building permits and the receipts and the texts from my mother. She was quiet for a long moment. Did they give you anything in writing when they offered you the property? She asked. Nothing formal. It was verbal. Do you have anything that establishes the terms of your occupancy? Anything that documents their acknowledgement of the work you were doing? 11 texts from my mother explicitly thanking me for specific improvements and expenses. She looked at me over her reading glasses. That's something. Is it enough? It's enough to work with. She paused. The counter-argument they'll make is permissive use, that you were there by their permission, and the permission has been revoked. We counter with unjust enrichment and equitable interest. She explained it in the measured way of someone translating a language you don't speak. I had materially improved the property at my own expense. That investment had created an equitable interest that was not simply extinguished by a 90-day notice. It's not a slam dunk, she said, but it's defensible. What's the risk? She was honest. You could lose the motion and be required to vacate. The court could side with the property owners on permissive use grounds. You'd have a damages claim for your investment, but damages and a home are not the same thing. I thought about Nora's lungs, about the air quality reports, about the 14 months I had spent making that structure safe enough for her to breathe inside it. Then we don't lose the motion, I said. Priya nodded. Then we don't lose the motion. While Priya was building our case, my family was building their own, and they were not being careful about it. Ava started showing up on Saturday mornings. This was new. She had never been particularly clearly interested in visiting before the Sunday dinner. Now she arrived with a latte and the comfortable proprietary energy of someone who considers themselves already in possession of a thing. She walked through my rooms. She ran her palm along the brick fireplace I had spent 4 days restoring. "Maybe I'll paint this a Tuscan terracotta," she said, to no one in particular. I gripped the kitchen counter. "Ava," I said, keeping my voice very level, "I'd appreciate it if you called before coming over." She looked mildly surprised, the surprise of someone who didn't recognize the boundary as a real thing. "It's technically their property, Clara." She left when she'd seen enough. I stood in my kitchen for a while after she left. I thought about that phrase, technically their property. It was accurate in a narrow and specific sense, and it contained within it the entire logic of what they were doing. That technical ownership trumps investment, that legal title erases 14 months of labor and $20,000 of materials and a child's respiratory history. I took out my phone and looked at the shared location I had on Nora's iPad. The iPad was a birthday present from 6 months prior, a refurbished model used primarily for reading apps and drawing programs and the occasional approved video. I had set up a home security integration on it 3 months earlier, after Ava's second uninvited visit, because I was a person who documented things, and I was beginning to understand that documentation was going to matter. The iPad sat on the bookshelf in the living room. Its camera faced the front door. Nora knew it was there. She liked the idea of our house having a guardian, which is the word she'd used for it when I'd explained the camera in 7-year-old terms. She had not, to my knowledge, done anything particular with that information. I would find out later what she had done. The city inspection was scheduled for a Friday. That was how I found out something was wrong. I got a call from the Building and Inspections Department on Thursday afternoon confirming the appointment. I hadn't requested an inspection. The house had passed all its permitted inspections during construction. I had the documentation. There was no reason for a new inspection, unless someone had filed a complaint. I called the department back and asked the nature of the complaint. "Anonymous concern about potential code violations," the inspector, a man named Dan Kowalski, told me. He sounded slightly uncomfortable. "I have to follow up on all complaints. I'm sure it's nothing." I said, "Of course." I said that was completely appropriate. I hung up and stood in my kitchen and thought. An anonymous complaint, timed for 2 days before our court date, in a house I had built to code, permitted and inspected at every phase, maintained meticulously for the benefit of a child whose doctor had put her respiratory requirements in writing. There was nothing to fail, unless something had been changed. I walked through the house. I checked the smoke detectors, all present. I checked the GFCI outlets in the bathroom, functional. I checked the emergency lighting, fine. I went to the hallway and looked at the carbon monoxide detector. The bracket was on the wall. The detector was there. I pressed the test button. Nothing. I took it off the wall. The battery compartment was open, empty. My hands went very still. I stood in my hallway holding a carbon monoxide detector with no battery, 2 days before a city inspection that someone had anonymously requested, and I thought about Nora's lungs, and the specific danger that an undetected CO leak represented for a child with her respiratory history, and the fact that the battery hadn't fallen out, because battery compartments in CO detectors don't spontaneously open. Someone had removed it. Someone had been in my house. I put a new battery in the detector. I tested it. I replaced it on the wall. Then I went to find Nora's iPad. I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because I think honesty requires acknowledging that I watched the footage alone, the night before court at my kitchen table at 11:17 p.m., and I had to set the iPad down and put both hands flat on the table and breathe through my nose for approximately 90 seconds before I could continue. Not because of what it meant for the case, because Nora had been home. She'd been home sick. A low-grade fever and a cough. Nothing serious, nothing like the hospital, just a sick day with apple juice and a blanket on the sofa. She'd been home under the blanket when the front door opened. My mother and Ava walked in without knocking. They didn't call out. They didn't announce themselves. My mother went directly to the kitchen and rifled through the mail on the counter, my mail, flipping through envelopes with the complete comfort of someone who does not recognize an intrusion as an intrusion. Ava went to the hallway. I watched her walk to the detector. I watched her hand close around it. I watched her pull it off the bracket, open the battery compartment, and remove the battery with her bare hands, efficiently, in one practice motion. My mother's voice through the small speakers. "Don't touch that yet." My sister's laugh. "If the city inspection fails Friday because of safety code violations, she has to vacate immediately, way faster than the 90-day notice." Then, from the sofa, a small voice. Nora from under her blanket. "Hi, Auntie Ava." The way Ava's face moved on that screen, the color leaving it, and then the smile slamming back into place like a shutter closing. "Hi, Bug." Ava's voice bright and completely recalibrated. "Go back to sleep." My mother said nothing. I watched her set down the mail and walk to the door with her shoulders very straight, and the door closed, and the footage continued with Nora alone on the sofa, and after about 30 seconds she sat up and looked at the camera on the bookshelf. She looked right at it, 7 years old. She nodded once, very seriously, like someone who has decided something. Then she lay back down. I texted Priya at 11:31 p.m. She called me back in 4 minutes, which told me she'd been awake and possibly anxious about tomorrow. "I have video," I said. "Of what?" I described it. The silence on her end lasted about 5 seconds. "Send it to me now." "Priya, send it now, Clara. I need to review it before 8 a.m. I sent the footage. I went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I slept, which I counted as a victory. The next morning, I braided Nora's hair while she ate cereal, and I tried to figure out how to explain to a 7-year-old that I knew about the camera and that what she had done was significant and important and also slightly beyond the scope of what I had expected from her. Nora, I said, I watched the footage from the iPad camera last night. She looked up from her cereal. I know. You saw Aunt Ava take out the battery. She took the safety thing, Nora said, the one that tells you if there's bad air. She said it with the complete factual gravity of a child who has sat in Dr. Okonkwo's office enough times to understand what bad air means. I didn't think she was supposed to do that. She wasn't, I said, so I kept the iPad recording. She looked at me. I didn't know if you needed it, but I thought maybe you might. I finished her second braid. You did exactly right, I said. She went back to her cereal. The courtroom at the Cook County Courthouse was cold and fluorescent, and the ventilation had a particular quality that I clocked professionally as inadequate. I noticed things like that, occupational hazard, and my family sat at the plaintiff's table like a family photograph that had been composed carefully for an occasion. My mother in her navy blazer, my father in a sport coat that he wore to events he considered important, Ava in white, and I did notice the white because Ava understood optics in the bone-deep way of someone who has spent 32 years in rooms, and white at a property dispute says first home, fresh start, innocence in a register that doesn't require words. Their attorney was a man named Jeffrey Hale. He had 15 years in property litigation and a voice that moved like something expensive and frictionless. He said permissive use structure, and Ava simply wants her first home and first home again, the second time like a hymn. He was good. I felt my jaw tighten. The judge was the Honorable Margaret Okafor, 61 years old, 22 years on the bench, a woman who had the specific, seasoned attention of someone who has heard everything and can distinguish genuine complexity from tactical performance at a speed that makes theater pointless. Her face gave nothing away. That was, I had been told by Priya, a good sign. Priya presented our case cleanly. The permits, the receipts, the photographs, the texts from my mother printed and submitted as Exhibit C, each one a small, inadvertent acknowledgement. The testimony from Dan Kowalski, the city inspector, who confirmed that the anonymous complaint had been filed 4 days before the court date and that upon inspection, the property showed no violations. The CO detector, when he tested it that Friday, had been fully functional because I had replaced the battery Thursday night. Hale objected to the texts as evidence of material obligation. Judge Okafor overruled him. Hale argued permissive use. Priya argued equitable interest and unjust enrichment. The judge listened to both with complete attention. Then Ava stood up. Her eyes were doing something specific, the trembling quality of controlled distress, which I recognized from 32 years of watching her navigate rooms, the particular look she produced when she needed sympathy from someone with authority. I'm not the bad guy, Your Honor. Her voice was soft, careful. I just want to start my life. I deserve a safe home. You do, Ava, I said quietly, across the aisle. She looked at me. It just doesn't have to be mine. From the plaintiff's table, my father's voice, low, loud enough. She is so incredibly ungrateful. Judge Okafor's hand came up, one finger. The room shut down completely. Then Nora tugged my blazer. What I felt in the half second between the tug and the moment I looked down was dread. Not because I didn't trust my daughter, but because I am her mother. And a courtroom is a formal place. And she was 7 years old, and I had not prepared her for this, because I had not known there was anything to prepare. She looked up at me. She looked up at the judge. Can I show you something my mommy doesn't even know about? She said. Judge Okafor studied her for a long, still moment. The kind of moment where everything depends on what a person in authority decides to do with an unexpected variable. What is your name? The judge asked. Nora. How old are you, Nora? 7. Almost 8. The judge looked at me. A question in it. I nodded once. The judge looked back at Nora. What would you like to show me? Nora unzipped her pink backpack with complete composure. She took out her iPad. She walked to the clerk's desk, the same clerk who had received my binder that morning, and she held out the iPad, and the clerk looked at the judge, and the judge nodded. The clerk connected it to the courtroom's display screen, and the footage played. I watched my family's faces as they watched themselves. My mother went rigid, not pale, rigid, the way someone goes when they are attempting to process the fact of being caught and are still, in the first seconds, running the calculation of whether there is a way out. Ava's face drained, and then the smile came back, and then the smile lost the fight, and what was underneath it was something I had never seen on her face before. Not guilt, not remorse, something smaller and more genuine than either. Fear. My father put his hands flat on the table and looked at them. When Ava's voice came through the speakers, if the city inspection fails Friday because of safety code violations, she has to vacate immediately. Way faster than the 90-day notice. Jeffrey Hale made a sound beside them that was not quite a word, and then Nora's small voice from under the blanket. Hi, Auntie Ava. The courtroom was a vacuum. Priya, beside me, touched my arm once. The small, precise contact of a professional telling you that what you're feeling right now is correct. My mother opened her mouth. We didn't mean to. It was a misunderstanding about the inspect. Judge Okafor raised one finger. Total silence. She looked at the screen for another moment. Then she turned to the plaintiff's table with the particular attention of a person who has decided something completely. We are not going to pretend, she said, her voice a scalpel, that this is a story about first-time home ownership. She picked up her pen. This is criminal manipulation and reckless endangerment of a child, caught on video. She looked at my mother, at Ava. The removal of a functioning safety device from a home occupied by a minor child with documented respiratory vulnerabilities, coordinated to cause a fraudulent code violation and accelerate eviction proceedings, is not a family dispute. It is a crime. She signed the order. She looked at me. The motion for eviction is denied. Dismissed with prejudice. She signed another page. The plaintiffs are barred from entering the property pending further proceedings. I am referring this matter to the state's attorney's office for review of criminal charges, specifically child endangerment under 720 ILCS 512-21.6. She put her pen down. Ms. Ose Mensa, go home. Change your locks. Today. I took Nora's hand. She was standing at my hip, perfectly calm, her pink backpack on her shoulders, her braids still tidy from the morning. I squeezed her hand and she squeezed back. The small, specific pressure of a person who knows she did the right thing and is satisfied with that knowledge. We walked down the center aisle. I did not look at my family. I didn't need to. I had spent enough years looking at them, trying to read them, trying to calibrate them, trying to understand why the calculation of what I was worth kept coming up short, and I had no more interest in that project. I heard my father's chair scrape back behind me. I did not turn around. The state's attorney's office opened a review within 2 weeks. I gave a statement to Detective Amara Ose, no relation, which she confirmed with a faint smile, who had 14 years in the Major Crimes Division and handled the intake with the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen every variety of family cruelty and maintained the useful professional distinction between the ones that crossed legal lines and the ones that merely crossed human ones. This one crossed both. Ava was charged with criminal tampering and child endangerment. She accepted a plea agreement 4 months later, community service, a fine, and a permanent record. Her attorney argued mitigating circumstances. The judge in that proceeding was not persuaded. The documentation was too complete. My mother avoided criminal charges. She was present. She had said don't touch that yet, but the specific legal threshold for her involvement was difficult to establish beyond civil liability. This is how the law works sometimes, and I made peace with it by focusing on what had happened at the eviction hearing, which was, as outcomes go, absolute. My parents' attorney, Jeffrey Hale, withdrew from the case 24 hours after the hearing. He sent a letter of withdrawal to the court that contained no explanation, which is itself an explanation. Robert Feynman, I'm sorry, that's the wrong story. Priya filed a civil claim for the value of the improvements I had made to the property. My parents settled out of court for $22,400, which was below my actual investment, but above my attorney's fees, and represented, in Priya's assessment, the fastest resolution available given that I wanted to focus on staying rather than litigating. I stayed. I changed the locks the afternoon of the hearing, as instructed. Nora supervised, sitting on the front step with her iPad, watching the locksmith work with the serious attention of a person overseeing an important project. Mommy, she said while he worked on the deadbolt. Yeah, bug. Was the judge nice? I thought about Margaret Okafor's face, the scalpel voice, the complete absence of theater in the way she'd signed those orders. She was fair, I said. That's better than nice. Nora considered this. Can judges have pets? I genuinely don't know. I think she seemed like a cat person. The locksmith finished and handed me 2 new keys. I gave one to Nora. She held it with both hands. 6 months later, Dr. Okonkwo cleared Nora for 2 fewer monitoring appointments per year, given the stability of her respiratory health in the current environment. She said the air quality in our home was excellent, which I already knew because I had specified the insulation and the ventilation system and the windows myself, down to the millimeter. I know what a building needs to keep someone safe. I know it in a way that can't be taken by a 90-day notice or a manicured smile across a cafe table or a sister with a latte walking through rooms she has already decided belong to her. I built that house. Nora saved it. She did it from a pink backpack, with the composed certainty of a 7-year-old who understood that a safety device was important, that removing it was wrong, and that evidence is just documentation waiting to be useful. She is, it turns out, a lot like her mother. She just works faster.